Hello everyone, and welcome to a updated guide or demonstration for the Minerva follower mod. This is going to be kind of a explanation of the MCM additions that have been added in version 1.1, as well as a demonstration of them in game. That way you all can see what some of these new features do, what you can customize her, and really show you all how much control you have over how she behaves in combat. For those of you that are downloading this as for your first time, you will assume that this menu is how it always has looked, but for those of you that downloaded version 1.0, you'll notice when using version 1.1 there are two more pages. Originally it was just these two. The top two are still the same, nothing's changed, but here are the bottom two. I'm going to kind of cover them real quick, and then I'll show you a little bit more about I'll show you all the examples in game of what you can do with some of these new features. So this new tab, this third one here, is the configure spells. This is pretty much what it sounds like. You can customize her spells now from the MCM menu. You no longer do this. She no longer has any spells on her actor base, or basically her actual actor that were manually added. All the spells that you see ticked right here were all given to her when you loaded the game. I did this because this is how you can customize spells. If they're sitting on her actor base, you can't really remove them, as far as I understand. However, if they are added to another NPC or actor after the game has started, then you can remove them. They can be taken away. Otherwise, they actually can't. They'll say that they have, but they really have not. So, but you can customize them here. You can remove all the ones that are ticked. You can take those off. You can re-add them back. You can add these ones that are unchecked right now. You can add all of them, take them all away, whatever you like to do. A couple of notes about these real quick, just to make sure you understand. The bound bow, put a little warning here. This, depending on what you let her do in combat and how many other weapons or magic she has, this can act a bit buggy. She'll get confused with this, and it won't work correctly. She'll kind of get stuck sometimes with it in her hand, not fighting anything, but she still has it in her hand, if you will. It can act a bit weird sometimes, depending on if you limit what she can do, so just be aware of that. If you're using bound bow, sometimes weird things can happen, so be careful with that. I generally don't recommend it unless you really want her to use it. The cloak spells, the lightning cloak, frost cloak, and flame cloak, I only recommend giving her one. Excuse me. Only one of them, because she will, or really any NPC that has these spells, if they have multiple of them, they will constantly cast them back and forth in combat. They'll cast flame, then frost, and then back to flame, and then frost again. They can't settle on one. They're not smart enough to know when to cast one or the other. They'll just go back and forth. So I only recommend giving her one, otherwise she will constantly flip back and forth. One of the complaints I noticed was about the alteration flesh spell, so that's an AI issue when it comes to what they cast. This will help limit that, though. If you know she's at a certain level and casting more than one alteration spell, you can start by removing like the oak flesh spell, and then stone flesh, and etc. on up, until she only is casting one alteration spell. NPCs just don't understand. They'll cast their best one first, and then the next best one right after it. They don't realize that once they cast their best one, they can stop. They just keep going. So you can take them away from her here. That way she'll quit doing that. So that's pretty much it. That's all the spells you can see here. Not everything has been added because some things either don't work quite correctly with NPCs, they don't use them right, or they can't use them. Like Detect Life or Detect Dead, they can't use that. So let's go ahead and move on to the next page here, which is the class and combat style. This is the real biggie, I think, in terms of what this new MCM features, what you can do with this. At the top here is her class. What does a class do? A class determines a NPC's level of skills. One-handed skills, light armor, two-handed skills, heavy armor, archery, destruction, restoration. That's what a class does. It determines how those skills are distributed. Basically, think of it in terms of there's a pot of points, almost, if you will, and they get distributed out to those specific skills. So, these are 11 skills that 11 classes, I'm sorry, that you can choose from. They're all custom. So I'll probably put out a little documentation soon once I get this video up that will give the primary skills that you can use with this. But you have several different options to choose from, so you can pick whichever one you would like. That will determine her skills as well as her primary attributes, how those are distributed. Does she get, does her health, go up more, or does she get more magicka instead of stamina, or does she go health and stamina, those type of things. So that's what That's what a class is. This will not determine how she fights in combat. This just determines what her skills are, what she is better at if you give her those types of weapons. So next we have what you really use to customize her for her combat. All of these different things are exactly like you are in Test 5 Edit or the Creation Kit, and you are modifying her custom combat style I've given her. These are the values you're changing, so these will let you make her behave however you would like to. I'll quickly go through these, but they should be rather self-explanatory. The attacking and defending tab is pretty self-explanatory. The higher this number is, the more she will attack, or more likely she will attack, and the less likely she will be to defend. This is just the opposite. The higher the number, the more likely she will defend, and less likely to attack. This one is generally for enemies, when I say enemies, NPCs that are together, that are kind of in this, that are faction relations. I generally recommend setting this about the same. This is basically, when in a group, ignore pretty much your attack setting here, and follow this one. I usually leave it about the same. You can do whatever you'd like and see. I find it to be, once you leave it about the same, I found it work the best. So, but again, you can play around with that and see what you like, or see what you find, and see if there's something that works a little bit better. This is when enemies are staggered. Let's say, for whatever reason, you use the first word of Unrelenting Force on them, and they'll stagger, take a step back or two. When that enemy is doing that, they're in that kind of stagger motion. Should she, be more likely to use normal attacks during that time? Or should she be more likely to use power attacks? Whether it be both, you can crank these values up. If in case you're wondering why these are so low, these are actually not that low. This is actually up higher than most other combat styles in the default game. So keep that in mind, that even though some of these values appear very low, these are actually, most of these are higher than what you would find in most normal combat styles that came with the game. So this is basically when enemy is blocking when they have their shield raised, two-handed weapon blocking and one-handed weapon blocking. How likely will be? I cannot talk this morning. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get through this quickly. How likely will she be to use power attacks and break through that block? If she has a one-handed, two-handed weapon, or a shield that she is blocking with, when should she bash the enemy, or when will she be more likely to bash the enemy? Would you want her to do it just in general, just kind of, at no special time, just always during combat? When the enemy has recoiled, if they're trying to attack and she hits them and bashes them backwards, they're kind of, their arm goes back and they're recoiling, should she follow up and bash them again? If the enemy is normal attacking, they're swinging a sword, a warhammer, just like normal, should she bash, how likely will she be to bash during a normal attack? If they're, swinging that giant warhammer overhead, they're using a big old power attack, how likely will she be to bash during that power attack? Do you want her to, be very aggressive with her bashing during that time, or do you want her to just not do it as much? Again, the higher the number, the more likely she will want to do that. I'm going to skip this real quick and come back to these. These are kind of a rather big one that I'll cover here in just a second. This is dual wielding. Do you want her to dual wield one-handed weapons, swords, axes, maces, daggers, etc.? You can turn that on or off here. This is when she gets close to an enemy. Do you want her to stand still and basically kind of be a tank and just take hits, or would you rather kind of have her circle around the enemy and not stand still and make her an easy target? Again, the higher the number, the more she will circle around, and the less she will stand still. Of course, the lower the number, the more she will stand still. When she gets up close to an enemy, how likely will she be to back off? If you want her to be a mage and she gets up close, maybe you want to crank this number up. That way she isn't standing so close to an enemy, if she's a pure mage, that is, and she only uses magic. Maybe you want her to back off always, so you would increase this number up. Maybe she's a sword and shield heavy armor tank that you've now set her to be. You probably don't want her to be backing away from an enemy when she specializes in that close quarters fighting. You want her to stay close to the enemy, so you would turn this down. That's basically what it does, is how likely will she be to back away. The flanking is kind of, I guess it's kind of used. It's not something that's that obvious, but the values do exist that you can change. When flanking, how far away do you want her to be from the enemy? Trying to get back around, trying to flank behind them, or around, I don't know if this is if it's just behind or to the side or what, but how far away from the enemy should she be while flanking, and how much time will she spend? Does you want her to spend a while flanking and then attack, or do you want her to maybe spend almost no time and then flanking and then go in for attack? You can adjust these here. At range, when enemies, let's say an enemy archer, how much should she strafe, move side to side to dodge projectiles? So if enemy archer is shooting at her, should she just step a little bit to try to dodge, or should she move a whole lot? You can adjust how much she will strafe back and forth in order to dodge projectiles here. Now let's get back up to this. This is one of the big sections that probably you all will be spending most of your time on. This is the type of weapons, or type of equipment, I should say, that she uses in combat. all these values here, whenever you set these, this does not determine, this is not a affirmative statement, or you're not telling her you can only do this. You are setting it to say, hey, I would like you to use this, and the higher the value, the more likely she will be to use that. And if you set something down to 0, she will be very unlikely to use it, simply because it's a multiplier value. And so if you have it down to 0, it's not multiplying. So you're going to be wanting, if you really want her to use something specific, you're going to be wanting to set that all the way up. And generally I recommend setting the other ones down to nothing if you only want her to use one thing. Now, by default, her class is a spell sword, and I've set up her combat style to match that. For those of you that think that the magic and melee weapon values are a little bit off balance, or a little bit unbalanced, I should say, in favor of melee, I wouldn't necessarily recommend changing it if you like her as a spell sword. I found these two values to work the best for her using magic at range and melee weapons in close quarters. Again, this is totally your call. You can customize her however you want. Melee weapons, just swords, axes, maces, whatever it may be. How likely will she be to use those in combat? The higher the number, the more likely she will be. Ranged weapons, bows and crossbows. The higher the number, the more likely she will want to use them in combat. Magic, it's magic. You know, you set that too high, she'll want to use magic more likely in combat. Magical staffs, the same thing here. An unarmed fist, how likely will she be to not use any weapons or magic and just use her fists? So these are the equipment or weapon type preferences that you can set here. So let me go ahead. I'm gonna go show you. I've got Minerva here standing behind me, and I'm gonna go show you all, demonstrate them, I should say, these, and show you all how what happens when you change them to certain values, because I'm sure some of you all are curious as far as what exactly these do. So we'll do that. Give me just a second, and I will be right back, and we'll get started with that.